6 miles. That's how close a group of adventurers were to the treasure trove of a lifetime as they stood in the low foothills before the Stone Mountains. 6 miles of rugged territory, to be sure, but these 5 adventurers had an advantage. A map, which showed them the way to a great treasure trove. Yet they were also wary, for the Stone Mountains had a chilling reputation, for they were named for the giants who dwelled there. Giants that were notorious for not liking any outsiders in their territory. The players also knew that beyond these mountains was a steaming jungle reputed to be the home of some terrible beast, and a land of mist and fire reputed to be filled with poisonous, noxious vapors. And who knew what additional terrors were contained in the sea cave that held the treasure itself? For those who buried it here did so for its security. But greed can make even the most timid summon up unknown reserves of courage, and so these 5 adventurers set forth on their quest. 6 miles was all it would take. 6 deadly miles. Hello again, folks. KR King here, helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. Today I'm going to be talking about how to turn one single 6-mile hex on a homebrew D&D map into an area where you can have an epic set of encounters, a full-fledged adventure. You know, and this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I have used hex maps since the very beginning of my days back in the 70s playing D&D. You know, I've always drawn my maps using either 5 or 6 mile squares, and then the players, when they explore the wilderness, they've charted this out using the same system. Today I use 6 mile hexes because the 5e movement rates are 24 miles as a normal movement on foot, so that divides itself well with 6 mile hexes. But you know, oftentimes when players are moving through a map 6 mile hexes, you know, it goes by maybe a single encounter occurs, maybe nothing at all. And in fact, I've played in games where, you know, the GM, when they describe the hex, the 6 miles that you're moving through, you'd think it was just totally empty like a desert. But you know, a 6 mile hex contains an incredible amount of territory and potential for encounters with all sorts of, you know, myriad creatures or settlements or whatever. So today what I'm going to do is scale it down to half-mile hexes to show you how you can take a single hex and create opportunities for multiple encounters, you know, puzzles, or role-playing. Because here's the thing, when that hex is the final destination point for some great treasure hunt, the players want a memorable adventure. That's why we play the game. So as I filled in my intro, I'm going to be using a treasure map that I've been developing over a series of videos on creating treasure maps as an example of, you know, creating a greater detailed map and using that to create multiple encounters in a single hex. And you can go back and look at those videos if you want to see the whole history of this and the story of it. Basically, the player characters had discovered this book that this rogue Salazin had pasted this map in, which detailed this treasure that he had found with a group of bandits, you know, 100 years before, actually 130 years. He'd been working on this memoir of this adventure and this map for all this time. The players discover this, and now they figured out through some clues on the map exactly where it is in terms of the continent. Basically, they figure out that it's here on this peninsula. And that peninsula structure is the reason that I chose this hex for this treasure site. Because a peninsula restricts access by land. You've got water on 3 sides, forcing the players by land to go through these mountains. And then I added my first qualifier to further restrict things in this hex by saying that the sea around this peninsula is notorious for hidden shoals under the water, for super bad weather that can rise up at any moment, and for a cliff structure that makes it almost inaccessible to land a boat. So what this does is, unless the players have access to flying mounts or flying magic or whatever, they're going to have to go through the mountains to get there. And so with this, you know, mountain access and the stone giants being there, notorious not wanting outsiders, it makes it logical that the peninsula would be largely unexplored. Now, interesting, if you look at the stats for stone giants, they're not like the vicious brutes that are hill giants or the militaristic, you know, power-mad giants like you get with fire giants or frost giants. They sort of want to do their stonework, their art. They just sort of want to be left alone. And what this means is there is a potential, if the players encounter them, for some kind of negotiation for passage through their area. Now, here's another thing. You could argue, though, giants are in one little section of a single hex, Is that enough range for a group of giants? And I would say yes. Why? Because it's a game. And so we suspend our disbelief in this sense, and that suspension, I think, should inspire you as a GM to come up with a logical reason why these giants are in this, this mountainous little section of this hex. So I've developed this sample campaign for this video channel, this frontier campaign that has only been settled by the player character races for the past 300 or 400 years. But the giants have been here for a very long time. So you would expect the stone giants to live generally over here on my big map in the Mountains of Teeth, but perhaps there's an offshoot that's settled in these mountains for some reason. Perhaps the rocks in these hills are very unique and make very interesting artworks, which we know that these stone giants prize. And then perhaps in the past 300 years, the stone giants have had encounters with the new, civilized races that have come here. These encounters have gone badly, and these stone giants have declared this area off limits. And again, what this does is forces the players to think creatively and, dealing with the stone giants, and make it logical that the peninsula is unexplored. Now, first of all, in this encounter, you may want to scale the number of stone giants so that the challenge rating of your group of players, depending on their level, it would be a fair fight or, a tough or even hard fight, but it isn't just going to overwhelm the players and there's nothing they can do. But you don't have to. Because if the stone giants, it's obvious that they're either going to kill them or drive the players off, they need to come up with a plan. Now, one of the most likely is that the players just figure, look, we're going to sneak through these, 5 or 6 half-mile hexes. They're following this river through this lake. We're just going to try to sneak through and avoid the giants. And if we happen to meet them, we are going to negotiate our passage. So the question is, do the players, when they discover this, do they decide, hey, let's research the history of the giants, their interaction with the humanoids, and try to figure out some angle that will allow them to let us go through? Maybe the players bring the giants some kind of stoneworking technology they don't have. Maybe they bring precious metals or something that the giants can use to inlays in their artwork, basically a bribe. Or maybe the giants need a favor. I have this lake here in these mountains, which the giants consider a sacred place. Well, what if some creature, entity, some force has moved in that the giants can't deal with? Some water elemental or something like this that the giants are unable, they can't go into the water. So they tell the players, look, if you can take care of this for us, we'll let you have passage. Because not only that, it's another encounter for the players. It's another opportunity then potentially to find some treasure or just get that experience. All right, so the next thing that we have on this peninsula is this rift cliff that runs along here that divides this lower section that has this jungle area from the higher section that has all this geological thermal activity, which sends up steam and noxious sort of sulfur gas. Now here again, in this limited geographic area, you've got this rift here, but would that really be enough to create such a dramatic rain shadow such that you would have jungle here and not here? Well, here's the thing. Again, it's a game. And because we're trying to have fun, I'm just making it real. Now, here's an important thing. Salazin wrote this book detailing, his adventures as a rogue, collecting this treasure, this and that. But his book is not going to say anything about this peninsula. It's not going to talk about the giants or the Rift Valley, the jungle. Why? Because he always was paranoid about people stealing his treasure. Yet he knew at the end that he wasn't going to ever go back there, which is why he pasted the map. So the map is going to have the information relevant to anyone who is going to the peninsula. And as you can see from this map I created a few videos back, the information on the map is pretty sparse. He tells the players follow the river beyond the waterfall, and he says, oh, there's giants there. Avoid the jungle, there's some terrible beast. Avoid the land of smoke and fire and this sort of thing. And then the sea cave, which you identify as being in relation to Dagger Rock. So this route along the Rift Cliff provides all sorts of opportunities for encounters. Think about flying creatures that might live in these cliffs and caves in the cliffs. Wyverns, manticores, cockatrices, this sort of thing. Now, maybe these creatures most often feed on the jungle below. That's where there's, it's the most fertile to find food. But, when they're flying around patrolling, they'll spot a group of individuals walking along the cliff face. But, you can also force the players to, deviate from just walking along this cliff. It's been 150 years or so since Salazin was here. There may have been, geological changes. Suppose that there's some kind of fissure or something breaks open and causes a split in the cliff such that unless the players, again, can fly over this very high, they're going to have to deviate. They're either going to have to go into this barren area, with the seismic activity, these sulfur fissures and whatnot, or they're going to have to climb down and go through the jungle. Now, in either situation, let's say the players are forced, they can't go over this fissure that's opened up. They have to go into the land of smoke. Is it viable? I mean, if it's filled with poisonous vapors, there's just no way they could survive. That isn't really fair unless you want to just force them to go into the jungle. But here's the thing. I always hate to have impassable terrain that the players absolutely can't move through, simply because I like them to go through there. I mean, what could live in this, sulfuric, smoky area? Steam mephits or fire snakes. But, you can get even more creative. Let's say undead, the ghosts of some doomed explorers. Or what if you have some powerful entity that uses this area? It's shrouded in mist, it can't be seen, and they create some kind of, area, safe sanctuary where they can stay and not be bothered. This could be a celestial or a fiend or something in between. It's, up to your imagination. But whatever it is, if the players have to go through this area and it interacts with them, it's going to be very curious. After all, it doesn't get very many visitors. But you could, present this area as it's very dangerous. The players may choose, if they can't get through the cliff route, to climb down and go through the jungle. Now, in the old days, the classic isolated jungle terrain used to be filled with dinosaurs, but of course you can be more creative. Although, if you had a pterodactyl flying along and swooping in on the players as they went along the cliff, that would be humorous. But of course, Salazin's map talks about some terrible beast living in the jungle. The green dragon comes to mind. And then the other aspect of jungle travel is not only is it difficult terrain, but because the foliage is so dense, something might sneak up to you like 5 feet away. But here's the other thing. Even if you don't force the players to deviate from the cliff path, you can tempt them. So suppose from up on the cliff, they look down and they see some structure in the jungle. Let's say the classic jungle pyramid. Are they going to be able to resist exploring this? Because here's the thing. They may decide, what? We came here to find Salazin's treasure. Let's just keep our eyes on the prize and not be distracted. But, as players are going to realize, GMs don't just put some structure in a jungle for no reason. There's something there. It's a long-lost temple, a remnant of an abandoned civilization, or something lives there. I can imagine like a Rakshasa or something. They're going to be tempted. So here's the thing. We are expanding the possibilities of this hex in both a realistic and game mechanic fashion. Realistic because it's isolated both in geography, the water around here is that no one can sail here, and the stone giants. But in a game mechanic session because it's a treasure hex. And treasure hexes deserve special attention. And then when the players finally get to the sea cave, they are going to realize that this is going to be probably guarded by all sorts of nasty creatures and even traps. Why? Because look at the work it took them to get that 6 miles. Now, before I get to the sea caves, here's a point of order. In the story that I gave a few videos back on this treasure, I mentioned that there's a group of NPCs who go to this auction because they think it's the original Salazin's Tale, the original book, which people have always been searching for. They lose out with the players, and they have this beef with the players. So the question here is, are they going to interact? Are they going to compete with the players, follow them to the peninsula, possibly get into a conflict? And this ties into a topic that I've, for a long time on this channel, I wanted to do in greater detail, which is how do you create a group of NPCs that interacts and competes with the players even on a long-term basis? But that's a topic that really deserves its own video or series of videos. But here's what I'm going to say. If you do have this group of rival NPCs who suspects the players may have found Salazin's original manuscript, may have information, they may try to follow them to the peninsula, and they may reveal themselves somewhere along the line. Whether at the mountains or the cliff or jungle or even at the sea cave itself. And so here's the thing, depending on the composition of this NPC group, we usually think of this, especially competing for a treasure, it's just going to be a fight. They're going to show up at some point and we're going to blast away at each other and who wins. But it doesn't have to be that way. The group, first of all, this group could run into their own problems along the way and be cut down to, 1 or 2 survivors. And those survivors may, depending on their temperament and whatever, they may be useful to the players. They may say, hey, look, we'll come along with you, help you, defeat what's ever in the sea cave for a cut of the treasure. So now we're at the sea cave itself. And, the last video, I went into Dungeon Draft and I created the dungeon with the multiple levels and talked about the creatures that I thought, I was talking about having some chul in there. maybe a tool got washed into the cave, and the magic of the treasure, the sentient sword, attracted it. They are very attracted. They're sort of, built to be guarding treasure and whatnot, and it lives there. And it could do, it could take other, giant crabs and have them as, foot soldiers or something like that. But as I said in that video, a reason I picked the sea cave was this element of the change in the cavern itself with the rising tide. There are areas at low tide that you have access to, and then when high tide they get flooded, and it creates kind of a unique environment. And it creates a ticking clock. And this is always fun in D&D. You've got a certain amount of time to get into the cavern, get the treasure, get back out, or you're trapped inside. Now, if you remember that video, I created one of these blowhole things. It sort of covered up. It was an old one that potentially the players, if they discovered it, could actually access from the top, but more importantly, escape if it gets flooded. And there's other elements here as well. It's almost been 150 years since Salazar has been there. There might be geological changes in terms of the water wearing things away, such that it's different than what he describes in the book as areas that should be clear. You could also have, a big storm come up that really causes a flood. You got to be careful with that. You got to give the players some warning. If it just happens while they happen to be there, they're like, that's quite a little coincidence. And they may feel like, that's a bit of a screw job. So there you have some ideas on how to take a 6 mile hex and expand it such that it can be, you can have encounters and adventures that last for a session or even more. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for more. Leave some comments. I love to read them and to answer them. But of course, my friends, the main thing is keep playing the greatest game ever invented, Dungeons and Dragons, and tell somebody else about it.